My grandparents were married for 61 years. 61 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment because in today's world it sounds like a myth. It sounds like something from a fairy tale or a history book or a documentary about a time that no longer exists. 61 years. They got married in 1942. He was 20. She was 18. He had $14 in his pocket and a job at a lumber yard that paid barely enough to keep one person alive, let alone two. She had a ninth-grade education and a suitcase with 3 dresses in it. That is what they started with. $14 and 3 dresses, and a promise they made in a small church with 11 people watching. And that promise held for 61 years. Through a world war, through the death of a child, through poverty that most people today cannot imagine, through arguments that shook the walls of their small house, through seasons where they barely spoke, and seasons where they couldn't stop talking, and seasons where the only thing keeping them in the same room was the fact that they had said they would stay. They didn't stay because it was easy. They didn't stay because they were happy every day. They didn't stay because some therapist told them their love languages were compatible. They stayed because they made a promise. And in their world, a promise was not a feeling. A promise was a fact. It was as real as the floor under your feet. You didn't walk away from a promise because you were unhappy. You didn't abandon a promise because something better appeared on the horizon. You kept a promise because that is what a promise was. Something you kept. Period. I am not telling you this to say that every marriage should last 61 years. Some marriages should end. Some marriages are built on the wrong foundation, or held together by fear, or poisoned by cruelty. And the bravest thing a person can do in those marriages is leave. I know that. I am not a fool. But what I am telling you is that something has changed, something fundamental, something at the root of how people think about marriage has shifted so dramatically in the last 50 years that the institution my grandparents understood and the institution that exists today are barely the same thing. They share a name, they share a ceremony, they share a piece of paper filed at the county courthouse. But the meaning underneath all of that, the actual substance of what marriage is supposed to be and what it demands from the people inside it, that has been hollowed out, gutted, replaced with something that looks like marriage on the outside, but functions like something entirely different on the inside. And nobody seems to notice, because the outside still looks the same. There is still a ring, there is still a wedding. There is still a reception with a cake and a first dance and a photographer, but the thing underneath all of that, the covenant, the permanent, irreversible binding of 2 lives into 1 life that cannot be undone because convenience or comfort or happiness demands it, that thing is gone, and what replaced it is an arrangement, a partnership, a contract with an exit clause that both parties know about from the beginning, even if neither one says it out loud. And arrangements are not marriages. Arrangements are business deals with flowers. Let me tell you when I think the shift started. It started when we made marriage about happiness. That sounds insane. Of course marriage should be about happiness. What else would it be about? But hear me out. When my grandparents got married, happiness was not the point. Happiness was a bonus. Happiness was something that showed up on good days and disappeared on bad days, and neither its presence nor its absence had any bearing on whether the marriage continued. The point of marriage was not to be happy. The point of marriage was to build something, a family, a home, a life, a legacy, something bigger than either person could build alone. And that something required sacrifice. It required suffering. It required long stretches of time where happiness was nowhere to be found, and the only thing keeping you going was the knowledge that what you were building mattered more than how you felt on any given Tuesday. That understanding that marriage is a construction project and not a feeling is what gave marriages their durability. Because construction projects don't stop when the workers are tired. They don't stop when it rains. They don't stop when someone has a bad day. They continue because the building matters more than the mood of the people building it. But somewhere around the 1970s, we flipped the script. We decided that marriage was supposed to make you happy, that if you weren't happy, something was wrong, that unhappiness in a marriage was not a normal human experience to be endured and worked through, but a symptom, a diagnosis, evidence that the marriage was broken, or that you had married the wrong person, or that you deserved better. And once happiness became the measuring stick, every marriage in America was put on a timer. Because happiness is not a permanent state. It is an emotion. It comes and goes like weather. And if the continuation of your marriage depends on the presence of an emotion that by its very nature is temporary, then your marriage is temporary too. You just don't know it yet. You are living in a marriage that has an expiration date stamped on it in invisible ink, and the ink becomes visible the first time you are unhappy for long enough to start wondering if this is all there is. My wife and I have been married for 44 years, and I will tell you something that would get me in trouble on the internet, but I don't care because it is the truth. There were years in our marriage where I was not happy. Years, not days, not weeks. Years where I woke up and looked at the ceiling and felt nothing. Years where we moved through the house like two ghosts occupying the same space but living in different worlds. Years where the thought of sitting through another silent dinner made me want to get in my truck and drive until the gas ran out. I am not proud of those years, but I am not ashamed of them either, because those years were real. They were part of the deal. They were the price of admission for the thing that came after them. And what came after them was deeper than anything that happiness could have produced. What came after was a kind of love that has no name in English. A love that is not excited and not passionate and not giddy and not any of the things that movies and songs and greeting cards tell you love is supposed to be. A love that is quiet and heavy and unshakable. A love that sits in the room like furniture. You don't notice it most days. But if someone tried to remove it, you would feel the emptiness immediately. That kind of love only comes from surviving the years when love felt absent. It only comes from staying when leaving would have been easier. It is forged in the exact moments that modern culture tells you to quit. Before I go further, let me mention this. Everything I have been breaking down on this channel about what happened to marriage, about what happened to loyalty and respect and all the things we used to be able to count on, I have written it all down. Every lesson, every teaching, 20 of them, in the order they were meant to be heard. It is called The Native Way. Link is in the description of this video. But stay right here, because what I am about to say next is the part that nobody in America wants to hear. The second thing that destroyed marriage was the death of sacrifice. Marriage requires sacrifice, real sacrifice. Not the kind of sacrifice where you let your wife pick the restaurant, the kind of sacrifice where you give up a version of yourself so that the marriage can survive, where you kill an ambition or a desire or a habit or a dream because it is incompatible with the life you promised to build with another person. That sounds extreme. That sounds unhealthy. That sounds like something a therapist would flag as codependency or loss of self. And maybe in some cases it is. But in most cases it is simply what commitment looks like when it is real. My father wanted to move to California in 1967. He had a job offer. Better money, better weather, better everything. And my mother said no. She said her parents were here. Her sisters were here. Her whole life was here. And my father stayed. He turned down the job. He never mentioned it again. He didn't hold it over her head. He didn't bring it up during arguments. He sacrificed, not because he was weak, because the marriage was more important than California. The family was more important than the money. The thing they were building together was more important than the thing he could have built alone. That is sacrifice. And it is the foundation of every marriage that lasts. Because a marriage where nobody sacrifices is a marriage where nobody is truly committed. It is two people sharing a space while each one protects their own interests. That is not a marriage. That is a roommate situation with rings. We stopped teaching sacrifice. We started teaching self-fulfillment. We started telling people that the most important thing in the world was their own happiness, their own growth, their own journey, their own self-actualization. And all of those things matter. I am not saying they don't, but when self-fulfillment becomes the highest value in a marriage, the marriage becomes a vehicle for personal satisfaction rather than a shared project. And the moment the vehicle stops delivering satisfaction, you trade it in. The way you trade in a car that no longer meets your needs. No guilt, no grief, just a practical decision to upgrade. That is what we have turned marriage into, a vehicle. Something you use until it stops working and then you get a new one. And nobody even flinches anymore because trading in has become so normal that staying feels abnormal. Staying feels like settling. Staying feels like you don't love yourself enough to demand better. We have taken the most honorable thing a person can do in a marriage, which is stay when staying is hard, and we have rebranded it as weakness. The third thing that destroyed marriage was the disappearance of community investment. My grandparents' marriage was not a private arrangement between two people. It was a public institution supported by an entire community. The church was invested in that marriage. The neighbors were invested in that marriage. The extended family was invested in that marriage. When my grandparents hit a rough patch, they didn't Google marriage therapist. My grandmother talked to her sister and her mother and the women at church. My grandfather talked to his brother and his foreman at the lumber yard and the old man who ran the hardware store who had been married for 50 years and knew a thing or two about surviving a cold season. The community held the marriage up, not because the community was nosy, because the community understood that a marriage was not just about two people. A marriage was a load-bearing wall in the structure of the neighborhood. When a marriage fell, it didn't just hurt the husband and the wife. It hurt the children. It hurt the grandparents. It hurt the friends and the neighbors and the church and the school and every system that depended on that family unit being intact. The community protected marriages the way you protect the foundation of a building, not for sentimental reasons, for structural ones. That community investment is gone. Marriage today is treated as a completely private matter. What happens between two people is nobody else's business. And on one level, that is right. Privacy matters. Autonomy matters. But on another level, the privatization of marriage removed the safety net. It removed the group of people who would step in during a crisis and say, "We are not going to let this fall apart." It removed the elders who had been through it and could say, "Listen, this is normal. This happened to us too. You will get through it. Here is how." It removed the accountability, because when marriage is private, quitting is also private. You don't have to explain it to anyone. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to sit in a room while people who love you challenge your reasons and push you to try harder. You just file the papers and post on social media about your brave new chapter, and everyone cheers for you because we have decided that leaving is always courageous and staying is never celebrated. The fourth thing that destroyed marriage is the one that makes me saddest. We stopped modeling it. Children learn what marriage is by watching their parents, not by listening to what their parents say about marriage, by watching how their parents treat each other when they think nobody is looking, by watching whether their father opens the car door for their mother, by watching whether their mother speaks about their father with respect when he is not in the room, by watching whether their parents argue with restraint or with cruelty, by watching whether their parents touch each other casually and often or move through the house like two strangers in an elevator. Children absorb all of this. They record it, they file it, and they replay it in their own marriages decades later without even knowing they are doing it. I watched my father hold my mother's hand every Sunday morning on the way to church, every Sunday, for as long as I can remember. He would reach over in the car and take her hand and hold it on the console between them, and they would sit there in the car with their hands together, and they wouldn't say anything. They didn't need to say anything. The hand was the message. The hand said, "I am still here. I still choose this. I still choose you." And I watched that every Sunday for 18 years before I left home. And when I got married, I held my wife's hand, without thinking about it, without being told to, because my father had programmed it into me through 1,000 Sunday mornings. That is modeling. That is how marriage is taught, not in a classroom, not in a book, in the car on the way to church, in the kitchen when your parents think you are asleep, in the hallway when your father puts his hand on your mother's back as she passes by, in 1,000 small moments that nobody photographs and nobody remembers specifically, but that together form the blueprint for how a person will love for the rest of their life. And what are children watching now? They are watching their parents stare at phones across a dinner table. They are watching their parents argue through text messages in the next room, with the volume up just loud enough to hear. They are watching their parents perform happiness for Instagram while living in cold silence the rest of the time. They are watching their parents cycle through relationships like seasons, a new partner every few years, each one introduced as the one who finally makes me happy, each one gone before the child learns their middle name. That is the modeling. That is the blueprint being installed. And in 20 years, when those children are unable to sustain a marriage past the first hard season, we will scratch our heads and wonder what went wrong. What went wrong was the car on Sunday morning. What went wrong was nobody reached for anybody's hand. I want to be clear about something. I am not saying the old way was perfect. The old way kept people in marriages that should have ended. The old way silenced women who were suffering. The old way prioritized the institution over the individuals inside it, and that caused real harm to real people. I know that. I honor that. The old way needed to change. But the new way has gone too far in the other direction. The old way said marriage is everything and you are nothing. The new way says you are everything and marriage is nothing. And neither extreme produces a life worth living. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Marriage should be a place where two people matter, and the thing they are building together also matters, where individual needs are respected and collective commitment is also respected, where happiness is valued but not worshipped, where leaving is possible but not easy, where staying is honored as the brave and difficult and worthy thing that it is. My wife is sitting in our kitchen right now as I say this. She has been in that kitchen for 44 years, and I have loved her in that kitchen, and I have frustrated her in that kitchen, and I have disappointed her in that kitchen, and I have stood in that kitchen at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, because I was afraid I was losing her, and I didn't know how to say it. That kitchen has seen everything. Every version of our marriage has passed through that room. The young version that was all heat and no wisdom. The middle version that was all work and no rest. The tired version that almost didn't make it. And the current version. The version that has no name because it is too complex for a name. The version where she knows every terrible thing about me and I know every terrible thing about her. And we have decided that the terrible things are part of the deal, and the deal is still worth making. Every single day. The deal is still worth making. That is what marriage is supposed to mean. Not a feeling, not a season, not a chapter in the story of your self-discovery. A deal. A permanent, binding, non-negotiable deal between two imperfect people who have decided that imperfection shared is better than perfection alone. And the reason that deal used to mean something and doesn't anymore is because we forgot what it cost. We forgot that the cost was the point. The cost was what gave it weight. The cost was what made it sacred. Because anything that costs you nothing is worth nothing. And we turned marriage into something that costs you nothing to enter and nothing to exit. And then we wondered why it stopped meaning anything. If what I said today hit you somewhere that surprised you, the book is there. The Native Way. 20 teachings. Link is in the description. Let it sit with you the way a good conversation sits with you, the kind you don't forget by morning. Tell me in the comments, what kept your marriage together when everything said it should fall apart? Or tell me what you wish someone had told you before you gave up on one. I read every comment on this channel. And if you are tired of the world telling you that commitment is a cage, subscribe. This is a place for people who still believe that staying means something. I will see you next week.